Hello, myself Sandeep Kumar. Today we look into a problem of finding the sum nearest to 0 of two integers from a list. Problem statement: a list that can contain positive and negative integers. We need to find two elements such that their sum is closest to 0. Example as below. Hints and assumptions. The sum can either be positive or negative, but the absolute distance of the sum from 0 should be considered to find the sum closer to 0. Assume that the maximum possible sum of any two elements in the list is 10 to power 9. Inbuilt sort may be helpful in this problem. Method 1, brute force method. So implementation of the brute force method in Python. First, we storing the input list in numbers variable. Then this number variable is passed to the function find closest to 0. This function is calculating the sum closest to 0. We are initializing the minimum sum value variable. Then using the nested loop, we check the length of the input. After the iteration, we are updating the result in minimum sum and result variable. Then after completion of the loop, the result variable is returned to the function, returned by the function to print statement, to print the output, which is 34, 38. Brute force method approach. The find closest to 0 function takes the list of numbers as input. The minimum sum variable is initialized to positive infinity using float. This variable will store the minimum sum found so far. The result variable is initialized to none. This variable will store the pair of elements with the sum closest to 0. The first for loop iterates over the list from the first element to the second to the last element. The second for loop iterates over the list from the next element after the outer loop's current element to the last element. In each iteration of the nested loops, the current sum is calculated by adding the current element from the outer loop and the current element from the inner loop. If the absolute value of the current sum is smaller than the absolute value of the minimum sum found so far, the minimum sum is updated with the current sum and the result is updated with the pair of the elements. After the nested loop ends, the result pair is returned for the printing. Implementation of the two-point method in Python. First, we store the input list in numbers variable. Then this number variable is passed to the function find closest to 0. Then we do the sorting of the list in ascending order. Then using while loop, we will calculate the current sum. Then we update the current sum in minimum sum variable and update the result pair in result variable. If the current sum is less than 0, then we increase, and if the sum is negative, we increment the left pointer, and if sum is positive, we decrement the right pointer. After completing the while loop, the function find closest to 0 will return the result to the print statement and the output will be -5, 6. Two pointer method approach. The find closest to 0 function takes the list of numbers and input. The function begins by sorting the list in ascending order using the sort method. Sorting is necessary to find the pair with the sum closest to 0 efficiently. Two pointer left and right are initialized. The left pointer points to the leftmost element and the right pointer points to the rightmost element in the sorted list. The minimum sum variable is initialized to positive infinity. This variable will store the minimum sum found so far. The result variable is initialized to none. This variable will store the pair of elements with the sum closest to 0. The while loop continues until the left pointer is less than the right pointer. In each iteration, the current sum is calculated by adding the elements at the left and the right pointers. If absolute value of the current sum is smaller than the absolute value of the minimum sum found so far, the minimum sum is updated with the current sum and the result is updated with pair of elements at the left and right pointers. If the current sum is negative, it means the sum is closer to 0 if we move toward positive values. Therefore, the left pointer is incremented by 1. If the current sum is positive or 0, it means the sum is closer to 0 if we move toward negative values. Therefore, the right pointer is decremented by 1. After the loop ends, the result pair is returned to the print statement for printing the output. Relevant data structure. In both brute force and two-pointer method, the data structure used is given the input list. It holds the element for which we need to find the sum closest to 0. Hence, it acts as a primary data structure to store the number. As cases to consider. In empty list, the code should handle the case when the input list is empty. It should either return an error or handle it gracefully without any issues. Single element list. The code should handle the case when the input list contains only one element. Since finding a pair requires at least two elements, the code should handle this scenario and either return an error or handle it. List with duplicate elements. The code should handle cases where input list contain duplicate elements. It should correctly identify the pair with minimum sum, considering all possible pairs. List with only negative or only positive numbers. The code should handle cases where input list contain only negative or only positive numbers. It should correctly identify the pair with minimum sum, taking in account both positive and negative numbers. Evaluation approach efficiency. The time complexity brute force method. The time complexity of the brute force solution is n ratio and the power 2, which is n, is the number of element in the list. This is because the solution uses nested loop to compare each pair of the elements in the list. The space complexity is since the solution uses a constant amount of space. Two-pointer method. The time complexity of the code is dominated by the sorting operation, which has time complexity of n log n. In the average worst case, where n is the length of the input, the while loop that iterates until the pointer meets or crosses each other task. Therefore, the overall time complexity of the code is due to sorting operation. Space complexity. The space complexity of the code in brute force method and two-pointer method is constant. The code does not utilize any additional data structure that grow with input size. It only uses a few variables to keep track of the indices and the minimum sum pair, which require constant space regardless of the size of the input. Conclusion. The solution provided earlier is fast and efficient for the given problem. It has time complexity of n log n, a space complexity of 1, which is well suited for handling the large input. It optimizes the search for closest sum by utilizing a two-pointer technique after sorting the list. Thank you.